What's up, guys? American Sputnik here. Today we got a little bit different of a topic as usual, but I'd like to talk about how I, as an American war veteran, got residency in the Russian Federation. So, first of all, thank you guys all for your comments in the last video. I read pretty much all of them. I love all your recommendations for other cities to be going to and all across Russia. I do have something that I am coming up with called the Russian Challenge, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But right now, I would like to just thank all of you guys for your comments. I didn't expect that video to do as well as it did, but I will be going to other cities. Like I said in the video, I do have a newborn baby, so it's hard for me to travel outside of Kazan at the moment. But I do plan on going to some other neighboring cities pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more information about Russia. Obviously, the more theme of my channel is travel and exploration and just going around kind of comparing things with the United States. But today I kind of wanted to touch on this subject because a lot of people have asked me this question. So let's get right to it. So, how do you get Western residency as an American or being an American military veteran? Well, the fact is being a military veteran from the USA doesn't really matter at all. You can get residency here for a bunch of different reasons. I did not, I will start off with, I did not get the Shared Values Residency Program. Now, for one, it wasn't a thing when I had applied. I did it the old fashioned way, and I'll explain to you a little bit about all that. So, my wife is obviously a Russian citizen. We met back in the United States. That's a story for another day. But we ended up deciding that we're for sure going to move to Russia. We want to start a family and just live out here, which ended up working out pretty quickly after I got residency. So, last year I applied for residency, and it was right before they even came up with the shared values thing. But what you got to do is a long list of things. It's a little difficult, and just being married to a Russian citizen is not enough alone to get you residency here. So I ended up going to a lawyer. I kind of figured out what I needed to do, and the one thing is you got to pass a language exam, and it wasn't an easy language exam. It was pretty difficult. You got to pass Russian history. You got to do grammar, speaking, reading, writing, listening. Also, you have to fill out like a fake job application for a fake job to prove that you know how to do certain things like that. Also, let's see what else. So they ask you a bunch of questions, obviously in Russian, and see how you answer back. I know that every section has 5 questions, and you have to get 3 out of 5 right in each section in order to pass. Now, this was a pretty difficult test. I did it at Kazan University here, and there's a bunch of other foreigners trying to get residency here. A lot of them were like, "This is crazy. I've never seen an American doing this," especially the people there said it was super rare. What made it all the more interesting. And, so we ended up going, we had a couple classes there at the university to practice for the test. Everything was in Russian. At the time, I still don't consider my Russian all that great, but I mean, I was able to understand everything. There was a really good teacher there, and she kind of went over like what we need to do, what questions. They give us some practice questions, and they're going to ask us like 5 out of the 100 practice questions, excuse me, that they give you. So I ended up studying for like 2 weeks, and I just did not think I was going to pass this. And this is the first step. I couldn't go any further unless I passed this test. So, I studied, and my wife kind of drilled me, and she does not speak Russian with me at all. I kind of self learned. I learned from her mom and her family by coming out here, friends from church and stuff like that. So, I kind of self taught myself that. My wife isn't a teacher. She's a little, just too impatient. We just speak English together. So, I didn't really have like a super crazy good skill, but she helped me. She helped me with this job application. That was probably one of the hardest parts. We also had to write a letter in a certain format to like a friend, just a make believe letter or telling a story about yourself, I guess. So I practiced all that. I practiced all the questions. And the hardest one, I think, was studying Russian laws. So one of the sections in the test is you have to pass your knowledge on Russian laws. And these questions were way above my vocabulary level, but I just started learning the words, and I was just like trying to really quickly get it. And I remembered some of the questions. Luckily, I just got very lucky on that section. I got asked questions that I had remembered studying in the practice thing, and I passed. So, I was able to understand those, and, I actually did better in the laws than all the other sections. I did get about, I think it was like an 85% or something on this test. I did quite well better than I thought I would. But, they ask you, so basically you go into the university, they take your phone, they take all your stuff, you can't have anything in your pockets. You go up into a camera with your passport here, and you open your passport and you say, where you're from, what test are you taking for what kind of residency. So there are two tests. There's for VNG and RVP. So I have Разрешение на временное проживание, which means that it's basically temporary residency. So, they make you go up to the camera, and I think this is like being observed by Moscow University. So it's very strict process. And, you say your name, you go through the lines, and then they go take you one by one at each station. So for the first one, obviously, they'll take you in and they ask you some questions, about just random questions in Russian, see your proficiency in conversation and answering. I did pretty well with that, and I could tell the instructors there were just smiling the whole time. Obviously, they're just like shocked that an American was doing this. And then you got to go and do the actual test portion in a big classroom, but like everyone's separated in seats, and you have a certain time period to answer all these questions. And like I said, you got to get 3 out of 5 correct. So I did this test, and I was kind of worried afterwards, but I did feel like I did pretty well, and I was just hoping, the laws was the one that I felt like was the hardest for me. Turns out, I got my results, and I did great, and I got a certificate. Now I'll take a moment to show you guys this certificate. So this is the certificate I got for passing the Russian language exam, and obviously I'm covering up a lot of it because it's my personal information. But, it's my U.S. passport. This is the certificate I got that I had to provide for getting residency. And, obviously Russian Federation certificate, Russian history, all that, laws. So it kind of explains everything that I passed it in and my name there. So I got that certificate and I applied for residency. So I passed the language exam and I did all that. So the next step was, obviously before I came, I had gotten my a sheet from the state. I was living in Colorado at the time, a police report background with all my history, if I've never been arrested, never been convicted as a felon, all that type of stuff. So I ended up going and getting that document, and I had to get it apostilled by the Secretary of State in Colorado, and have that there. That was a very important document to have. I had to have my birth certificate. I had to have every little piece of information you would imagine, for such a thing. So obviously I have the language certificate, my police background report, my birth certificate, my passport, registration, all that stuff. And, at that point, and obviously my marriage certificate, that was a big one, and everything has to be translated. So you have to translate all your documents into Russian as well, and then give them the originals. So they're going to have all your information. Now, the lawyer we paid to make sure she did all the filing paperwork to give to them correctly. So she did a wonderful job. And, we got all that stuff in order. We went down and, basically you're going to these administrative buildings all the time. And it took us a few mistakes of going to the wrong one and being told you got to go here or there. But, that was our fault. And then you get there, and obviously there's a lot of people right now and, currently just trying to migrate to Russia from other countries. So, it is a place where you got to be really on top of things there, because people will just go in front of you in line and stuff like that, and I mean, that's just how it is. People are trying to get their documents done. People work at a certain time. So, it is different. And I did really feel like what it's like to be an immigrant. But it was just an experience for me. And I ended up getting everything done, and I submitted everything, and I was told, okay, so you're good. They gave me like an extension visa for, the 4-month time period, which basically will be the waiting period till you see if you got approved or not. So obviously it took 4 months later, and then I found out that, all right, you're approved, and you give them your passport, and they give you your RVP, Разрешение на временное проживание, which is basically, your temporary residency card that you earn. So I'm not going to show you my card, because all it is basically it's inside of this passport, and it's a stamp out of a whole page in my passport showing all my information. It says Разрешение на временное проживание on there. So that's basically what that is, temporary residency. Now, right now that my son was born, I'm obviously able to get permanent residency and citizenship and all that. So I'm going for permanent residency coming up soon. Obviously my son was born in the Russian Federation, but, I'll be able to get that, and you get a secondary booklet, like a little blue passport, which is your actual, it's more like a green card. This is just a stamp in the page. Now, one misconception you should know about, if you do plan to come to Russia, you plan to get residency, be sure that you know you also need a special visa for entering and exiting the country. Temporary residency card isn't enough to enter and exit the country. You also need a special type of visa to do that. So be aware of that. Don't make that type of mistake. But other than that, they have this shared values program, which came out, I think, a couple months after I had submitted everything. And I looked into it, and I think, okay, cool. But for me, it just wasn't for me. I understand the reasoning behind it and I agree with a lot of it, but this is my take on the whole thing. You're going to come to Russia, you want to move here, you got to understand the language. I think taking that language exam is very important. You're not going to get by in most cities outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg only knowing English. It's virtually impossible. Obviously, you're going to come and move to Russia. A lot of people watch Russia, they want to come here, but they don't really know much about it. Now, I would advise that you learn the language, go into it and, learn a little bit, be able to get by and understand. If you want to get residency, you got to earn it that way by, at least having the common, respect to learn the language. Now, I know a lot of people want to get out of their situation where they are, hey, if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. Me personally, I'm glad I did it the old fashioned way. I just feel more that I don't feel like I feel out of place if I were to come here and just get a freebie, a handout, oh, you get residency, you don't got to know the language and all that. I think it's a very important part of, the life here. You got to, take time to understand the culture and the language and respect everybody and respect the cultural values and the way people live here in Russia. So, obviously you can see I am an Orthodox Christian. That's just something I became a few years ago as well. I'm reading books like this. This is Crime and Punishment. Learning a little bit about the Russian culture. I have been studying Russian history. That was a big part of the test, and that was my favorite part of the test because I was like 100% on that whole section, obviously. So, it goes back to very old history that they're going to ask you questions on during that time. But, if you want to come here, just take your time to learn about Russia, understand the culture, understand the language, come out here and visit, interact, maybe make some friends. Um, if you do want to get the shared values program, at least try your best and, do what you can to understand exactly what you're getting yourself into. But for me, I am glad, like I said, I got it the old-fashioned way, and it was a really good moment when I had that certificate in my hand because I had been studying Russian all this time, and I've had something to show for it finally. So I felt like I accomplished something out of it, and I felt good about myself after that, and I really had my doubts, because like I said, I speak Russian, but I still make a lot of mistakes. I read slowly. I write like a kindergartner sometimes, so that's just the process. This is not an easy language. It's very difficult, but it is very important, that you understand it. And every day I'm learning. I do have a teacher. I do plan on making a video about how I learned Russian, so stay tuned for anything like that. But I just want you guys, to get a little understanding of how I got my residency here, because obviously you can marry a Russian citizenship or a Russian citizen. Back then we didn't have the shared values program. It had right before it even ever came out. Now you can get it that way. But I'm just sharing my story of how I got residency. And honestly, I'm very grateful to be in this country. I think it's the best decision I've made in my life, and I have the most respect for Russia because my son was born here. If it wasn't for Russia, I would never have met my wife. And if it wasn't for Russia, I wouldn't have my amazing son. And those are the most important things in my life. And having her amazing family and all that, just being around and having that sense of community and family that I have that I wasn't really having in the United States after I lost my mother to cancer, coming here, it felt like it was a replacement because we were living a pretty lonely life up there, me and my wife, working constantly, and we just were all about making money, and that's it. And you work for this stuff that you don't really end up needing. You end up becoming a slave to it. And it's just, I come out here and I feel freedom and I feel love. And I feel loved by my community, my friends, my neighbors, my wife's family, and obviously my son is here. But I am also a proud American. I'm a proud Italian American. I'm always very into my Italian heritage and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm not Russian. I'll never be Russian. But I respect this country more than anything because it gave me the most important things that I have in my life. And I just, I'm honored that I'm here. I'm very grateful that I'm here. And, I'd love to do whatever I can to help people who do want to come here and maybe feel the same way. Every time I've come here, I felt like a home for me. And, I've never felt like I didn't belong or whatever, and, I'm fine with taking crap if anyone gives me issues or whatever. I really don't care, so obviously I have served in a war zone. I was in Iraq and all that. So it's not really, and nothing, little insignificances don't bother me. Obviously not everybody wants Americans to be somewhere or who knows what. But also in the U.S., I think I had more aggressive interactions almost on a daily basis with just the people on the streets there and, in the places that I would work than I even have here. Here I've always had nothing but help, good neighbors and solid people who honestly I feel like people are a less fake here just in general, so once you become a friend with somebody, they become a very good friend to you. And, you never feel that false sense, obviously things are different everywhere and things like that could happen everywhere. But I am grateful to be here, and I hope that that video helped you guys kind of understand my situation. And, I don't really know much about the Shared Values program. I know there's plenty of videos on it. I know my buddy Daniel, Wild Siberia, he's made a few videos on that topic before. But, I know that there are a lot of Westerners that do want to come here, and it's just my best advice to you is, even if you want to do the shared values and all that, take the time and learn the language, learn the culture, learn the history, learn the customs and courtesies. Don't just come here acting like you're just the way you are in the United States. You got to adjust to where you are, and you have to have some respect. Obviously this is not my home country, but I will do everything I can to respect and honor, the customs and courtesies here and understand about the place that I'm at. Being an Orthodox Christian is very important to me. My religion is very important to me, and I'm very grateful to be in a place where there's such deep roots of that all around me. That kind of helped me a lot more too. When I started becoming Orthodox and converted from Protestancy, that helped me a lot more, really appreciate, Russian culture. Obviously, I live in Kazan. This is a Muslim republic. There's Muslim and Christians living side by side peacefully. A lot of my wife's family are Muslim, but obviously we don't have issues with one another, and we respect one another. And I love the Tatar people, and I love living in Tatarstan, and I love learning about the Tatar culture, which is also very interesting. Because in Russia, there's not just one religion. There's tons of different religions. There's tons of different ethnic groups. And, part of this channel is I want to explore a lot of those different regions and meet people and hear the languages and learn a lot more about those ethnic groups and cultures. So stay tuned to this channel. If you guys want to see more videos, I'm going to be traveling. It is a travel channel. I will be doing some more informational stuff like this in the coming weeks because, I got the baby and all that, and these are pretty easy for me to do. But, in the future, this channel is going to mostly be me going on the streets and going on crazy adventures and interacting with the people. So, if you want to stay tuned for that kind of cool stuff, like and subscribe. I really appreciate all your comments. And also, the Russia challenge I came up with. So, I decided that if I get 100,000 subscribers, I will take the Trans-Siberian from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. And I will not just do a straight shot. I will stop in different cities along the way and explore them and make a whole series on the whole journey. Obviously, that's a very cool sounding journey, but at the same time, I'm probably going to be on a train for a good, 10 to 14 days. It's 6 days straight across, but like I said, I'm going to be stopping in different cities and staying the night in those places and showing you guys as much of Russia as I can. So, share this with your friends, share this with, your family, whoever's interested in Russia that you know, and if you guys want to see that, let's make it happen. Let's get this channel up to 100K. I'd be more than happy to show as much of Russia as possible to a bigger audience of people. But other than that, you guys stay tuned. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope it was helpful for anybody who plans on getting residency for the Russian Federation or plans to come out here. But for now, до свидания, y'all.